Yes, it's Joe Walsh.
It's like your favorite station.
Hey y'all, this is Kristin Casey, author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh.
Just like they do on the radio.
And you are listening to Joe K on the Play That Rock and Roll podcast. Now it's all about the podcast, and I'm telling you, Joe K is one of the best.
So I guess this is sort of the lawyer portion of the show in case Henley comes calling. So we'll just say allegedly across the board for everything we discuss. You know, settle down, Don. But that's another thing where, like, even in the Eagles documentary, they barely touch on that little attempt at a reunion. Do you remember when Joe got the news that they wanted to put it back together in 1990?
Everything that I remember I put in the book, and it was basically that we were at the Bel Age Hotel,
Okay.
Which was not far from Joe's penthouse in Westwood. And when we, trashed the penthouse until the maid could get there, we'd move into the Bel Age Hotel, which is now the London. And I was sleeping, and Joe woke me up. And he's like, we gotta go. Like, that was the first I'd heard of it. Like,
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I think talks may have been going on for a while, but he just didn't want to get his hopes up or something. I don't think I don't think he got one call and it was all of a sudden get your ass there. I think, and plus I wasn't living with him yet at this time. So I was on the road with him. I had my place in Austin, so I'd go home for a week or two and then go with him for a week or two. So there might've been some talks going on when I wasn't with him. So I got to LA, we move into the Bel Age, and all of a sudden he wakes me up as excited as can be. Like, I don't know if I'd ever seen him. The only time I probably had ever seen him that excited was when we were going to meet Ringo. And I remember that distinctly because at the time I'd known him for about a year, and we had spent every minute of like the first half of that year joined at the hip in Australia, New Zealand. And when Ringo put that band together and it was official and Joe was taking me to meet him, I'd never seen him more excited and nervous. And then again, a year later or so, when he took me to the, I want to say it was maybe SIR, whatever the rehearsal studio was, he was very, very excited. And I did read in Felder's book that apparently it was supposed to have happened sooner, but Joe had missed some dates or something like that. So I was surprised to read that just because I hadn't been aware of it, but I may have been and I've just forgotten, but I don't think so. I remember feeling like, oh, this is brand new news.
Right.
I wake up this morning, I'm yanked out of bed and I'm going to meet all the Eagles. And of course, like you said, Glenn Frey wasn't there. Yeah. I will say that Don Henley could not have been sweeter. It was the first time I had met him. As soon as he found out I was from Texas, he was, we started comparing notes on Texas, and he was just unbelievably sweet and gentlemanly and gracious. And of course, that's the thing about Henley, is that on any given day, he could be like a total pompous, agitated, barking jerk. For no reason. Like, he would just open the door that way, and then other times he would just be the greatest guy you could ever meet.
Oh, sure.
Whereas Glenn Frey was just always kind of a aloof and kind of a jerk, that I remember. Of course, when I first met Glenn Frey, I was a crack addict, so putting that in context, and maybe he had every right to be that way.
Well, if yours was the only account that described him like that, maybe, but I've read a lot of things that, you're pretty much in line with.
And Felder and Timothy B. I had toured with Timothy B. as part of Ringo's band, so
you're right. That's right.
Yeah. And he could not have been sweeter. I mean, he was, when he found out, that was when I met him, because he wasn't in Ringo's first band, he was in Ringo's second band, I think.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Yeah, so I met him at the recording studio when the Eagles got back together, and he couldn't have been sweeter either. He found out I was a vegetarian. He started writing down all of his favorite vegetarian restaurants, and even which dishes I should get at which. I mean, for the girlfriend of a rock star, you never know how others are going to treat you. You know, some will be a little careful because they don't know how long you're going to last. Others couldn't care less about you. You're just you're just some chick who's in the way of them jamming with their buddy. And then others are just unbelievably sweet, like, Townsend and John Candy and Ringo Starr. Felder, I always adored, and I like the way Joe was around Felder, because kind of like with Rick, he just seemed to really relax and be himself and just be, happy and comfortable around Felder and Rick the bass player more than anyone.
One thing that Felder's book and your book have in common is that you both sort of put the spotlight on the real, like, sterile, behind-the-scenes element of the '94 reunion, and sort of how, like, that tour, those shows, was kind of a facade, because even though everybody was technically getting along, it seems like there wasn't a lot of love between the guys during that tour, and they kept to themselves. So when you were on that tour with Joe, what was your experience with, like, I guess I'd call it Eagles World backstage? Like, did you see the other guys in the band very often, or was everybody kind of cornered off?
I would say very much they were cornered off. In the very beginning, I didn't go to the rehearsals, maybe one in the very beginning, if I recall. And I don't think I went to one. But I knew people, aside from Joe, I knew some people who were there working it, and so I would hear stories. When I went to that soft opening for the Hell Freezes Over tour, which was like mostly for industry people and friends and family, I was backstage, and there was I don't want to say a friendliness or warmth or much interaction, but certainly more so than I saw at any time for the rest of the tour. And, they each had their own trailer, and they had their families with them. So nobody came into Joe's trailer except for Felder right before the show. I'm sitting there with Joe. It was, he was nervous. I'd never seen him so nervous. Literally never in my life. Oh, he was just catatonic almost, honestly. And I felt very helpless because I wanted to say something to be encouraging, but he was just, when you're newly sober and you have so much self-doubt and shame. And even with all the rehearsals, it was his first time sort of back on stage and surrounded by guys who had their shit together,
Oh, sure.
And Joe was a little intimidated too by their, Henley's singing voice, and Timothy, for one thing, Joe never considered himself, a great singer. I mean, he definitely was good and had his unique sound, but those guys had just been knocking it out of the park the whole time he'd been spiraling. So, and he didn't want to disappoint anybody. He didn't want to screw up. And Felder came by and stuck his head in the door, and he could see how nervous he was, and he made a little joke. I talk about it in my book. And it was the first time that Joe actually kind of took a deep breath, and he seemed to relax a little bit. And then they go out. But, none of the other guys came in. They all sort of kept to themselves a little bit. We saw them backstage, and like I said, there was, what seemed like a normal sort of level of friendliness. And then when the tour started, I only would meet up with him like once a month or something. And
oh, okay.
But it was very, maybe a little bit more than that in the beginning, but by the end of the year, but it was very noticeable. And in fact, so noticeable, especially compared to all the other tours we'd been on, where it was very much of a family atmosphere, from Herb's in New Zealand to Ringo Starr's tours, especially to all the many tours we did with Joe just as a three-piece. Everybody hung out together. We ate together, talked together. At the very least, when you're on the elevator together, you're chatting, you're acknowledging each other's presence. Yeah. And that's the one memory that stands out more than anything, is we were on the way to a show. We're at this hotel. We get on the elevator. I won't say who, but one of the other Eagles was on. We stop at another floor. Another one of the Eagles get on. There are 3 Eagles in the elevator, maybe a road manager or assistant or something. There's like 6 of us. And they didn't look at each other. They didn't greet each other. They were like total strangers. And I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. We walked through the lobby and they all got into their separate, cars to go to and I don't think they interacted again until they were on stage.
Gosh, that's like working in an office building. Like before COVID, that's like how I would be at work, getting into an elevator, look at my phone,
Yeah. Nobody had cell phones back then, but I
Right.
guarantee you everyone would have been looking at them if they'd have had them.
Sure. Did you ever see? Did you ever meet their manager, Irving Azoff?
I may have, but I don't have any recollection
Oh, okay.
of it. I
Yeah.
feel like I must have, but I don't remember it at all.
Yeah. Well, maybe he's not that memorable. So did before the reunion kicked off, you must have heard, and maybe I'm asking you things you can't share, but did Joe share stories about his time in the Eagles and, what maybe he loved about them or what frustrated him about them? Did he talk a lot about them, or were they sort of out of sight, out of mind when he wasn't with them?
He talked about them some. I think he chose his words carefully.
As we all do.
Hey Joe, how you doing? How's your album? How's your tour? How's Don Henry? How's been flying? Who, what, where?
Absolutely one of my favorite podcasts. Got to give him a listen.
Yes!